Hello, world, and thank you so much for listening to Master English with Tim, the podcast where Tim helps you to learn English in depth and detail and without ever hurrying. I'm Tim, native speaker from the United States, teacher for almost 20 years, world traveler, speaker of French, German, Russian, Spanish, and a bit of Polish, and podcaster now for 98 episodes. In this week's episode, I'm going to tell you about a real star for intermediate learners of English, a very powerful and practical word part that you can use to reshape the meaning of a lot of different verbs. That's right, I said word part. The focus of this week's lesson is not a whole word, but instead a prefix. In case you didn't know, a prefix is a group of sounds or letters that you put on the beginning of a word to change its meaning. For example, the prefix, which is the star of this week's episode, is out. There are quite a few reasons that I think this prefix is so amazing and wonderful. The first is that out is really short. It's easy to remember and easy to pronounce and easy to spell. It has a reasonably predictable meaning, and it can be combined with a lot of different verbs. Just add out to most action verbs, and you get a new verb without doing much work at all. And you can understand most of the time, before you do anything, what the verb will mean. Let's add the prefix to a verb and see what happens. Let's take a nice action verb, run. What does it mean to outrun someone? Well, if you outrun someone, it's simple. You run faster than them and reach the finish line first. Actually, that's an important point. You outrun someone. For example, you outran him, outran her, outran us, outran them. You always outrun someone. And this is always true when you use a verb with the prefix out. Whenever you use a verb with the prefix out, you need to say who you outran or who you outsmarted or whatever. Okay, let's move on to the next verb. Actually, let's start with a verb without a prefix. Our target verb will be perform. If you perform, you do a job that someone, usually other people, expect you to do. If you work in sales, you sell insurance, for instance, your boss expects you to sell a certain number of insurance contracts every month. If you perform well, you sell that number or more, and if you sell less, then you perform badly. Or, more dramatically, if you're an actor in a theater, then the audience expects you to act well, showing emotions that seem true to life. Or if you're not a human being at all, but instead a beautiful, shiny red race car, people expect you to drive faster than all of the other cars. Or if you're something very abstract, like an investment at an investment bank, then people expect you to earn more for them than other investment choices. So now let's add our star prefix out, and we get the verb outperform. So if you're an insurance salesperson and you outperform everyone in the company, then you sell more than everyone else. If you're a Ferrari and you outperform a Lamborghini, then you drive faster. And in the context of investment banking, on one day, a stock from Airbus might outperform gold, and the next day, gold will outperform the Airbus stock. And do you know what? All verbs which have the prefix out are connected with competition, either real competitions like in a running race, or kind of imaginary competitions where a person is watching a situation and imagining that it's a competition, like an investor watching companies from completely different industries to see which one earns a bigger profit, or like a gym coach watching the kids in their class run. Let's look at a couple more verbs with a meaning similar to outperform. We also have outclass. If product X outclasses product Y, then product X outperforms product Y in many categories, or maybe even all of them. So, a gaming computer with 64 gigabytes of RAM and many terabytes of ROM totally outclasses even the MacBook Pro that you work with. And a supercomputer, which is used to do things like predict the weather and invent molecules for use in medicines to treat brain diseases, will of course utterly outclass your gaming PC. By the way, you can learn more about the word utterly and how we use it to make strong words even stronger in episode 89, Words with Impact. Now, coming back to our topic, of course, the United States and China are always trying to produce a supercomputer that will outclass the ones from the other country. Another verb with a meaning similar to outclass and outperform is outshine. You outshine someone if you are even better than something that is already really, really good. For example, you might have heard of the 19th century writer from the United States, Herman Melville, and his famous book, Moby Dick. I first read Moby Dick a long, long time ago, but the feeling it gave me is still in my mind all these years later. But are there any books which are even better than Moby Dick? Well, I think the Iliad and the Odyssey, both by the Greek writer Homer, both outshine Moby Dick. Okay, let's move on to another verb with out. In fact, let's come back to our verb outrun from the beginning of the episode. If you outrun someone, you don't just run faster than someone, you run faster than them in the context of a competition. For example, I think most people remember the famous Olympic runner from Jamaica, Usain Bolt, who outran basically everybody. I remember also when I was in high school, I could outrun all of the kids in my class when we went to gym or physical fitness, but strangely, when I joined the running team, I was one of the slowest and almost everyone on the team outran me. Actually, now that I think about it, our star prefix out always is used in connection with some kind of competition. The competition could be formal, like in the case of Usain Bolt in the Olympics, or it could be a case where the competition is really weak, like in my gym classes in high school. None of us kids thought about trying to run faster than the others, but our gym teacher or coach seemed to think about it differently. He didn't say anything bad about the guys who ran slowest, but he did have some extra respect for the people like me who ran faster than the others. So in the coach's mind, I outran the other kids, but in my mind, I just happened to run faster. Okay, being strong and fast is of course really cool, but what about being smart? Now, if we go back in time, many, many thousands of years ago, we will see human beings living like animals in the jungle or in the desert, without clothing and with only the simplest kind of houses. If a person got attacked by a wild animal, well, they definitely couldn't outrun a tiger or lion or cheetah, so people had to use a different strategy. They had to outsmart wild animals. Prehistoric people could outsmart wild animals by using fire to keep animals away, by making weapons that changed the balance of power between animal and human, by using camouflage, by learning dangerous animals' habits, by learning to make animal sounds to trick dangerous animals, and by using group tactics to keep everyone safe. So yes, prehistoric people were able to outsmart animals in a number of ways. We also have a couple of synonyms for outsmart. We can also say to outwit someone. Now let's shift our attention for a second from the prefix out to the root, which is wit. We say that a person has wit if they are able to quickly say something funny just at the right moment. And we say a person is witless if they are really stupid. For example, I become witless if I don't get enough sleep. So again, outwit means the same thing as outsmart. In movies about cops and criminals, the cops and the bad guys are always trying to outwit each other. And kids in school often try to outwit their teachers and find ways to not do the work that the teachers ask of them. Another really interesting synonym of outwit is OUTFOX. A fox is a small animal which is kind of like a cat and which has kind of orange-brown fur and a clever-looking face which is a little bit long. Foxes don't just look clever, they are clever. So if you outfox someone, again, you behave in a smarter, more intelligent way than them, and you beat them. Criminals and police, like I said, are constantly trying to outfox one another. And foxes very often outfox whatever animals are trying to catch or kill them. Coming back to prehistory, though, where we were before, I have a question for you. What result did human beings get from outsmarting, outwitting, or outfoxing all those wild animals? Well, we obviously outlived all those animals trying to kill us. If you outlive someone, it just means that you live longer than them. They die before you. Another long-term result of us outfoxing wild animals is that we survived, and a few 100,000 years later, we built something that's somehow amazing and boring at the same time. First, shopping malls, and then, more recently, Amazon, Temu, and Alibaba. And of the 200 or so countries we have in the world today, which one does the most shopping? Well, I looked online to see which country's citizens do more shopping than anyone else, but couldn't find any information that seemed reliable to me. I guess it also depends on your definition of shopping. Are we talking about shopping where people just search for things and don't necessarily buy? Or are we talking about searches that end in real purchases? Well, according to the internet, which is of course right 100% of the time, it's Chinese people who spend more time on websites looking at goods and services, so we can say that the Chinese outshop every other nation. But if we are judging by average sales per person, then I think the United States outshops China and probably every other mid-sized to large country. And if we include all countries, even small ones like the United Arab Emirates and microstates like Monaco, then I think that Emiratis and Monegasques, that's what people from Monaco are called, believe it or not, outshop even Americans. So we can argue about what it means to shop, if real shopping includes making a purchase or not, but I'm pretty sure that Emiratis and Monegasques outspend Americans, and that the average American outspends the average Chinese person. Now, one thing to remember about China is that it has a huge population, over 1.4 billion people, so the Chinese people definitely outnumber the US population, which is only 340 million people right now. In fact, this means that the Chinese outnumber the US by over 4-1. And at the same time, in 2023, China lost its place as the most populated country in the world. Indian citizens outnumber Chinese ones by a few tens of millions of people. Now, since we're still on the topic of buying and selling, and in this episode more generally on the topic of competition, let's talk about a famous competition between two giants of industry, the US airplane manufacturer Boeing and the European airplane maker Airbus. Which company sells more airplanes? Well, I didn't know the answer to this until just a minute ago when I searched, but in fact, Airbus outsells Boeing. In fact, Airbus outsells Boeing by about 15% of revenue. And if we're talking about profit, then Airbus certainly outsells Boeing because in 2024, Boeing actually lost money. We have other famous competitions between two huge companies. So, Coca-Cola clearly outsells Pepsi, although the reverse is true in South Asia and the Middle East, where Pepsi outsells Coke. And in Tajikistan, the almost unknown brand RC, or Royal Crown Cola, outsells Coke. If we're talking about shoes, Adidas shoes outsell Nike ones. And of course, Android phones outsell Apple ones. I think it's obvious why Android outsells Apple. It's because Android phones are so much cheaper on average than Apple ones. But really old mobile phones, not smartphones, but dumb ones, they have one advantage over smartphones. Dumb phones have batteries that last for just weeks. I remember having a Nokia phone way back when and charging it like once a month. So yeah, the battery in an old dumb phone will totally outlast the one in any modern smartphone. Also, old houses made out of stones rather than wood will almost certainly outlast newer houses made from cheaper and lighter materials. Let's come back for a second to a verb we already talked about very briefly. That verb is outlive. So, sometimes you can hear kind of sad stories about people who lived to be 100 years old or even older, and whose children died before them because they got so old. In those cases, we can say that a parent outlived his or her children. We can also say that some organizations or traditions created by people outlive their usefulness. For example, some countries in Europe, like Spain and Norway, still have a king or queen, and a lot of people say the tradition of having a monarchy has outlived its usefulness. On the other hand, some people still think that monarchy is a good tradition. They have nostalgia for the past, and they also think that having a monarchy that has existed for centuries gives a country stability and continuity. For these people, the pluses of having a monarchy outweigh the minuses, which means that the minuses are maybe important, but altogether the pluses are more important. So again, the pluses outweigh the minuses. When you were a kid, all of the things that you had were small. You had small shoes, small clothes, and probably a small bicycle. But then you started to get bigger, and all of those things were too small for you. So you can say that you outgrew your shoes, you outgrew your clothes, and you outgrew your bike. And maybe your mom or dad gave them to a younger brother or sister, or sold them to a second-hand store. Kids don't just outgrow clothes and bikes, they also outgrow their books and movies and music. Maybe you had some favorite movies when you were 6 or 7 years old, but by the time you were 10, you were too old for them and had outgrown them. And if you're an adult now, you've probably also outgrown the music you listened to as a teenager. Okay, before I end this episode, I need to give you one more verb. That verb is outdo, with past forms outdid and have or has outdone. Outdo has a meaning that's similar to outclass, outshine, and outperform that we talked about earlier. I didn't include outdo with those other 3 because 4 verbs with similar meanings all at the same time is a bit too much. So, to illustrate this meaning of this verb, outdo, imagine that you have a friend who always bakes amazing birthday cakes. Everyone knows this friend always does a great job. The cakes look and taste great. But this year, that friend is away on vacation, and so now it's your turn to make a cake for a friend who loves water skiing. So, you make a cake with chocolate icing on the outside, but also a big blue lake made of blue icing on top, and on top of the blue lake, you have a toy boat that's pulling a water skier, and you can see the waves in the water behind the boat. There are even some very small candy fish in the water, and there are toy people sitting on the beach and watching. So in this case, your cake is so good that you outdid your friend. If you outdo someone, that means that people had high expectations from that person, and what you did was even better. And you know what? If the next year you made the same cake, but twice as big, and with a toy boat that has a motor in it, then you could say that you outdid yourself. People expected a lot from you, and you unexpectedly performed better than you ever had before. Okay, I think that's enough verbs with out for now. I hope that you enjoyed it. Thank you for listening, and see you all next week.